Hey everybody, we have a special treat for you here on the channel today. So I am going to be talking to, I guess, a video game legend. In addition to that, one of my favorite indie developers, Second Dimension Games. So I've covered them before. We did a video a while back where we talked about Ira the Crow Maiden and Curse of Ilmore Bay, and some of the other games that Second Dimension Games puts out. But today we have something very special for you. We're going to be talking about a brand new Nintendo game that was meant to come out 40 years ago, but it's actually going to be coming out very soon. And so I'm here today to ask some questions to not only the IP designer and programmer, whose name is Robert Yeager, but we're also going to be talking to Adam from Second Dimension Games, Adam Welch. So thanks, first off, guys, thanks so much for doing this video and for sitting down with me and answering some questions about this upcoming game, Montezuma's Revenge. It's very exciting.
Well, thanks a lot for having us. Certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Love having you on the channel. So, what we're going to do first is start to talk about the IP itself. So, Montezuma's Revenge. If you didn't know it, it's a 1984 game that came out for a bunch of different Atari systems: the 2600, the 5200, the Atari, the Apple II. The ColecoVision, the Commodore 64, the IBM PC, which launched as a self-boot disk, as well as the ZX Spectrum, which when it was released there, it was called Panama Joe. So, Robert, you are the person who designed and programmed this original game. Tell me a little bit about the origins of Montezuma's Revenge and how the game came to be on your end.
I started very young with game design, and I wrote a couple of games that were really arcade clones for the Atari computers. I did a game called Chomper, which was a weak Pac-Man clone, and then Pinhead, which was something of a clone of Midway's Kickman. And I wanted to do something original. I wanted to just do something really original and totally take advantage of the hardware of the Atari computers. So I was just talking about it with my friend Mark Sunshine, and he says, "Hey, why don't you create a game and call it Montezuma's Revenge, and give it a Central American theme, and just run with this idea." And I did. And I just went ahead and started creating graphics and working on the game. It took me about 6 months. When I was 16 years old when I wrote it.
Wow.
And that's basically how it came into existence.
That's really cool. How was it? How did you make it? Like, what platform were you making it on? Were you making it on a PC, or were you using a
This was written on an Atari 800.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the time, the larger video game publishers were doing cross development. They were actually using Unix machines at the time, and of course, I couldn't afford to have a real mini computer at the time. The Atari computers were ridiculously expensive. I mean, it was like over $800 in 1982 money. Is a lot of money.
Sure.
So I did my original development on an Atari 800. The only thing special about my Atari 800 is that I had a very special disk drive. I had a Perkins Electronics double-sided, double-density disk drive because the source code for Montezuma's Revenge was larger than the capacity of a normal disk at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, the whole thing about Montezuma's Revenge, for those of you who don't know, is it's the phrase that you would use, the colloquial expression for getting diarrhea when visiting Mexico. How
Exactly. Yeah.
How did the publisher on this was Parker Brothers on this game when it came out. They're a pretty family friendly board game company. So the first question I have is, how did they allow that name to pass? And the second question is, a board game company, even back then, they were just kind of trying to test the waters with video games back then. How did you end up working with Parker Brothers on publishing it?
It's interesting. I've never been asked this question, and it is a good question because you're right. Parker Brothers was a very family-friendly game company, and in addition to that, they did not like to take risks. Every single one of Parker's titles was either an arcade game license or a movie license. They were very, very careful. Montezuma's Revenge, I believe, was the only real original game that they published that wasn't based on something famous or an arcade title. I don't, you want to know something? I never really gave it any thought. It may have slipped under the radar. I mean, not everyone knows that Montezuma's Revenge is diarrhea. I mean,
Yeah.
Mark did. Mark and myself, we got a great laugh out of it when we were 16.
Yeah.
So, I think back then it was a better known expression than it is now.
That's true. That's true.
That's what I believe. But you're absolutely right. Parker Brothers was a very conservative company, and they did not really ever mention any problem or any suggestion about changing the name.
Huh. That is pretty interesting. I would think that they would look at that and they would immediately just be like, nope, vetoed. Now you own the actual IP rights, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I own the trademark for Montezuma's Revenge, Montezuma's Revenge with an exclamation point, and all the assets and everything is my intellectual property. I was very careful. I had good legal advice when I was a kid.
Yeah,
to maintain the rights and to insist upon a licensing deal and not anything that would be an ownership type thing. So
yeah.
I've always had the rights to Montezuma over all these years.
That's impressive, especially for back in the day, because especially as a 16-year-old kid, you're just looking to get your foot in the door. So a lot of people, they're just signing themselves away. But the fact that you were able to hold on to this property, that's pretty awesome.
That's Daddy. That's I was 16 and I had good advice from my father.
Nice.
Who supported me all along the way. I was very, very lucky to luck all along the way. Luck to be in a family that could afford to buy their young 13-year-old an $800 computer.
Yeah.
They were convinced that I knew what I was doing. And hopefully I proved them right.
Sounds like so, yeah. Now, in 1988, there was a port for the game that was released for the Master System, but it improved the graphics and the sound and everything from the previous computer versions and the Atari versions, as well as adding some additional features. Now, based on this upcoming release for Montezuma's Revenge on the NES, what were the differences between the Master System and the NES version? And maybe Adam can kind of chime in here. Like, what for those versions? What changes are going to be implemented, or are you just handling the port directly to the console, Adam?
No. Adam is not doing the development of this game. This game is done.
Oh, okay,
basically.
so it's completely finished.
So the game is finished.
Mm-hmm.
And it was programmed by a phenomenal programmer named Philippe Renaud, who lives in Germany. And he came to me, I guess it was several years ago, with the proposal to create the Nintendo version of my game. And so we have a completed game. And it is extremely loyal to the releases, to the famous releases of the time. There were changes made, and the Sega version is not really the famous version of Montezuma's Revenge. They took some liberties in there, and I wouldn't compare the upcoming Nintendo version to the Sega version. It's more like the original real version of Montezuma's Revenge.
Okay. Now, that's classified as one of the earliest examples of the quote-unquote Metroidvania genre. Maybe they should have called it the Zumavania genre.
Yeah, that would have been nice. So, yeah, I've been told, by many people that the Metroidvania kind of carried the torch of the Montezuma theme.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not going to claim that Montezuma was totally original either. I mean,
Right.
there were elements in Montezuma that was, borrowed from Donkey Kong.
Right.
Um,
Pitfall and stuff like that.
Yeah, and in the original, there's a bat that's a timer that was really inspired by Evil Otto from Berserk, if you remember the coin-op game.
Yep. Yep.
So you can see little bits and pieces of influences in Montezuma, but most of my influences were from the arcades, though. I mean, I was an arcade kid.
Right. Right.
So that's where
Robotron and Pac-Man and Space Invaders and all the classics.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was an arcade kid during the first generation of arcade games. So I remember Pong and Breakout and Gunfight and, the black and white games were the original games. And at that time, I was more into pinball. But then when the better games started coming out, especially Space Invaders, of course, I mean, it was like, I got to become a video game designer. There was no doubt about it. Those games were so, there was some kind of a moment, that where we went from that first generation to the second generation of arcade games that just was a revolution, where the pinball games just got removed from the arcade and just more and more video games moved in.
Right.
And of course, Pac-Man was a phenomenon.
Yeah. So this version, you're saying, is not a game that was supposed to come out 40 years ago, in the sense that it was developed and finished 40 years ago, and you're just now bringing it to the NES. You're saying that this game was created a few years ago when you talked to this Philippe gentleman, and he kind of brought you the idea, and then you two worked on it together?
When I say it's delayed 40 years, Montezuma was one of the big hits of the 80s, of the mid 80s, and it never appeared on the hottest console of the 90s. And the reason it never appeared was my own personal neglect, and plain and simple. At the time, I had a deal with Parker Brothers for the Sega version, which was a very nice deal. I was very happy about it, and I did get an offer from a company to do the Nintendo version.
Oh.
But I basically declined the offer because I just very recently did an offer for Sega that was a much better deal, and I basically told them to come back with a sweeter deal. I was expecting them to do that, and it never happened. But at that time, the Nintendo Entertainment System was very speculative. And no one knew it was going to take off the way it did.
Sure.
But for me, in the late 80s, I went through the video game crash of 1985. And I mean, I'm sure that your listeners and yourself are aware of what happened. But when you lived through it, at that point in time, it really looked like the fad was over. I mean, that was the word on the street, more or less.
Oh, do you mean 83?
Well, I mean, the crash. I say
they always say 83, but.
Well, I wouldn't. It didn't really hit the fan until 84, 85.
Yeah.
And then like everything really fell apart. And even I can tell you, like, I was something of a video game, a star, where Parker Brothers would send a limousine for me, and it was when you created video games, and I was earning money for Parker Brothers, they treated me very, very special. And then when the video game business collapsed, it was like, okay, call yourself a cab if you want to come see us.
Right.
Whoa, things have changed here.
Yeah.
So, but the game business itself really fell apart. Where 1 year I'm getting offers left and right, and then the next year it's like I'm having a hard time having people pick up the phone. So I basically left games for a number of years, and I worked on Wall Street in financial technology for a number of years. So I've never left coding. I've always loved programming, and I've worked in a few different sectors in my career. But games, of course, are special. Games are the most competitive, probably some of the most difficult type of computer programming.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I want to talk about sound, because on my channel, we're a very big proponent of sound. We do a podcast called XVGM Radio, where we talk about video game music and the composers who write them. So for the Master System port, it had improved sound. So what what is happening with this NES version? Is it going to be a whole new soundtrack, or is the soundtrack based on the Master System version? And who's doing the music for that? Is that Felipe?
No. Okay.
Phil?
The Master. I don't own the rights of the whatever new ideas they threw into the Master System version. So I it's not at all similar or based upon that.
Okay.
The original version from Parker Brothers didn't have music back in the day. It wasn't expected really. We were talking about the early in the early 80s.
Sure.
Now for the Nintendo programmer, Felipe was very clear that we need to have a soundtrack. We need to have music. It's just expected in a Nintendo game. So I hired a very, very talented composer. His name is Peter Bendeck. He goes by the handle XTD.
Okay.
And he's wonderful. He never did a Nintendo. He never worked with Nintendo restrictions before, but he did a great job.
Nice.
So we have it is a new song, new soundtrack, and that is new. The graphics, the gameplay are absolutely authentic to the original game.
Very cool. That's very exciting. So, Adam, tell me a little bit about your working relationship with Robert here, how you guys came together to work on this, and what you've got planned for this upcoming release of the game.
All right, so back, I want to say it was around March or April time, Rob had sent me an email asking if I was interested in potentially publishing Montezuma's Revenge. Mm-hmm. And, I saw that and I got really excited. So I didn't even finish the email. I went and, Googled who owned the IP, not realizing it was Rob that emailed me. So I find out, who owns the IP. And then I shoot him an email, and then he's like, "Yeah, dude, I just emailed you. Like, come on." I'm like, "Oh man." So we got to talking, and he was actually in Connecticut a short time later, and he stopped by my house before I had moved, and I showed him, what I was up to, the type of things I was working on, the kind of releases I had done, and a few months later, he comes back to me and says, "Hey, still interested?" And here we are today.
Very cool. So what sort of things are you bringing to the table on a publisher level for this game? Now, since the game itself is done in development, what sort of versions are you going to be releasing? Everyone's going to be able to see it on the Kickstarter, but tell me a little bit about what's going to be coming out, what the plan is for that.
We're still working on some of those finer details, but we're going to have your typical digital release. We're going to have your cartridge only, your complete in box copies. Mm-hmm. And we're working on the list of goodies to include on the more full reward tiers. Things potentially like maps and, stickers, other, inserts or standees or, those types of things. We're still ironing out those details.
Cool.
But, so we've been tossing ideas back and forth around about that. Mm-hmm. Finding out different sources and prices and just doing, what we think is best to get this thing out there and to make the fans really happy with, getting a release of this game on a console that it's eluded for the last 4 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to ask, since I'm a big fan of his work and he's done work for you, is Louis Martins in talks with you for doing a cover for the game?
No, I think we're only doing one cover. We're going to keep the rewards as simple as possible without causing any kind of confusion.
Okay.
Or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Sounds like a plan. Yeah. Keep it nice, short, and sweet, and simple. Very cool. All right. Let me see. Let me just go back to my questions here. Now, for the carts themselves, are these all brand new carts, like new hardware for the equipment, or are these donor carts? How does that work as far as what you use?
So I don't use any donors for anything. I have brand new PCBs. I get brand new cartridge shells, dust sleeves, boxes are, created brand new, styrofoam blocks for, the authentic NES release feel.
Yeah.
Those are all, brand new. everything is all new.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear. And I think I feel like that's a question that doesn't get asked often enough in these Kickstarters because, a lot of the times what ends up happening is you just assume that this is going to be new hardware. But I like people to know, hey, we're not using donor cards. We're using, brand new PCBs, brand new hardware and everything. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, when I first started out, I used donor carts, and you know what? Desoldering EEPROMs is not fun.
No.
And it's not fast.
Yeah. So what's the timeline as far as release? You got the Kickstarter coming out around December, and what's the timeline for releasing the actual game itself?
Really, once all the funds have been collected and the project is successfully funded, we're hoping to get the first batch out within a few weeks. We have to order, the parts and everything, which will take a few weeks to come in.
Sure.
But I plan on, hitting the pavement, storming through all the orders as fast as possible because, got to get these games out to the backers.
For sure. Yeah, that's really cool. That's good to know because a lot of people, they worry about Kickstarters because a lot of Kickstarters take, they take a while, and understandably so. There's a lot of development and publishing, production. A lot of things go into a Kickstarter. So it's nice to see a Kickstarter be nice, short, and sweet. Like, hey, we're getting in. You guys can order this, and it'll be out within the next, a couple weeks or maybe a month or two or whatever the case may be. There may or may not be a few delays here and there depending on the, especially now with COVID and everything, the way that shipping is. So, but it's nice to know that the mentality is we're going to get this product out as soon as we can.
Yeah, and one of the big benefits that we have going into this campaign is the software is already done. And we're finalizing the artwork for the boxes and manuals. So we have a real solid jump already on the campaign.
For sure.
So it's really, once we get the numbers in, make sure we can order the appropriate parts, get them all in, get it assembled, and mail them all out.
That's great. That's great to hear. So there's also a Game Boy Color version that came out for this game several years later, but I believe it was a sequel, right? It was called like Montezuma's Return or something like that.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, actually, for the Game Boy, it was called Montezuma's Revenge, but that's it's a little piece of my history that I don't talk about that much. In the late 90s, I had a software company in Hoboken, New Jersey, called Utopia Technologies, and we created a successful coin-operated game called Countertop Champion. It was a tavern game for adults, and I wrote the entire code for that. And I decided to work on a sequel to Montezuma, which was an early first-person 3D game. And it really had a very impressive technology at the time. It was an early 3D engine, and similar to Montezuma, it was a terrific graphics demo that really showed off, the power of what a computer can do with games. But unfortunately, there were some serious political problems all along the way with that company. It was a difficult. Something of the company came to a pretty a nasty ending, and it's just a period of time that I really don't talk that much about.
Sure.
The games, Montezuma's Return and the Game Boy version of Montezuma's Revenge was published by GT Interactive, and It was never really supported by them, and it didn't do very well as a game.
How do you feel about the game in retrospect, as far as the actual game itself, outside of the whole politics of everything that went down? Like, are you a fan of the game, or did you end up liking what the game came out to be on the Game Boy?
Oh, the Game Boy? No, I don't. That was never really truly authorized. The final cut by me. I never really cared for the Game Boy version. But as far as Montezuma's Return goes, that really was a pretty spectacular piece of software. It was a marketing and a company failure, but as far as the software itself, it was pretty great. And Actually, about once a year, I hear from one of the developers who really would love to open up that source code and put it into the public domain. And I personally am, I don't want to open up this can of worms, basically. So I mean, there are people that were involved in the project who I would prefer, not to have to deal with and communicate with.
Sure.
So I doubt that's ever going to happen. But there are people who do remember that game, and people are interested in what in early 3D technology.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right. Well, that is all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to mention to the people who are watching this, who are hoping to pick up the game?
You could join the Facebook. The Facebook page is what I update most frequently. It's Montezuma's Revenge Game, facebook.com/Montezuma's Revenge Game. And also, as far as Montezuma's Revenge, there is a reboot that's out right now for computers and mobile devices. It's been out for a couple years. You can just search for Montezuma's Revenge in the usual stores. And we're also going to release finally a free ad-supported version of the game, which will be released very soon, hopefully in the next week or two.
Very cool.
But we are absolutely, I mean, really, right now we're most excited. The energy is in the Nintendo cartridge.
Right. And Adam, what about on your end? Anything that you want the people who are watching to know about your upcoming release?
So the Sega version of Ira the Crow Maiden is getting ready to be manufactured and start getting out to the pre-orders and reward backers for the campaign. The Super Nintendo-ish version is coming along. Hopefully we'll have that soon and get that out to the backers as well. And then the next thing we're working on is a role-playing game for the Sega Genesis.
Yeah, I've been watching you and the artist who you have on Second Dimension. I've been watching both of your feeds with the work that you've been doing on it. Looks really exciting. Looking forward to getting Ira the Crow Maiden as well. And of course, this upcoming game, Montezuma's Revenge. So I want to thank, first off, it's a huge honor to meet you, Robert. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me about this upcoming release. And of course, Adam, it's always great to hear from you.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
Likewise.
All right. Well, that is going to be it for this interview. Go check out the Kickstarter. The link will be down below if you want to check it out on my channel. And thanks so much for listening to this interview, guys. Thanks.